Good afternoon or good evening, whatever time zone you may be in. It just turned afternoon here in New York. So it's great to have the chance to have this discussion. It's obviously a very important discussion, as are the others during this whole conference. I'll perhaps start with just a couple of minutes of remarks to maybe frame some of the thoughts that I have around this, and then go through our distinguished panelists, if we could each talk for just about 5 minutes, so we could then do some follow-up questions and thoughts. So restoring trust is obviously, well, is it obvious? And the answer is, I hope so. And the statistics would bear out that there is a lack of trust in institutions around the world. It's been trending negative, both at the governmental levels, at the levels of business, and in fact, in other areas such as healthcare and so on. So there is a very real issue around the restoring of trust. It is at historically low levels, and we have on some of these other panels discussed some of the reasons for that. And I think one of the big things that I think about is the need for shared facts and a shared narrative, one that most people can agree with. And I'll quote from a movie, and I think this relates to some of the issues we have now going on with revisionist history taking place in the United States and perhaps elsewhere. And that line is, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? And I think, we have unfortunately a fair amount of that going on in the world, where people are saying what you saw is not what you literally saw, is not reality, when in fact you know it to be. In addition, if there is a shared narrative right now globally, unfortunately, the surveys that I've seen would indicate it really revolves around grievance and grievances. And when people feel aggrieved, their overall trust goes down, their views of institutions goes down, they believe the world becomes a zero-sum game. I win, you lose, and vice versa, and many other negative implications. So a big part of this to me is, how do we move beyond a shared worldview around grievance? And then I would say, in terms of both the positive and maybe even something that is even scarier, at least to me, is the advance of technology, and how it is has both the potential for being a huge positive influence in so many ways, and supporting democratic values, and supporting learning, and providing knowledge and agency to people, and at the same time can be exactly the opposite. And I think right now, which way that's going to go, in what ways, and by what degree, and where, is very much in the balance. And literally the next couple of years may prove to be decisive in that regard. So I think we have a very tall task, and an important task, and an immediate task, to educate around technology, its uses, so-called media literacy around AI, and how to use it in the right ways. And one of the things that I firmly believe, and I mentioned this earlier in another situation, another panel, that we need to have the most important companies in technology believe that the best outcomes for them are in fact through best practices. That if they actually do things for the good of humanity, they have the right kinds of rules and regulations, guidelines, etc., that is actually going to result in a better outcome for them. I am not sure that is widely believed at this time, and we can come back to that. So later on, I have a couple of thoughts around how we might restore trust, but those are some of the issues that keep me up at night, frankly, around this issue. And I look forward to hearing everybody in the panel. Again, if you could keep it just to a few minutes, so that we'd have a chance for some crosstalk after. And I'm going to go around my screen. So I think, Alberto, if you wouldn't mind going next, and as our distinguished chairman as well, you're next on my screen. So welcome, Alberto.
Hi, thank you very much. Well, we do have enormous amount of research how trust can be destroyed, eroded, and how trust can be repaired and reestablished. I'm talking about my field of experience that is basically in the field of mental health, of education, and also of conflict reduction and conflict solution. Basically, we have the concept of working alliance in education, in medicine, or any of the so-called helping profession. Also, working alliance is a concept on community work, where the whole community is held. Also, there is a therapeutic alliance. All the variable of all kind of alliance at the individual, group, and community level have been highly researched, and they are relationship established based on respect, profound respect, respect of differences of different religions, different orientation in any kind. Not only respect, and so lack of judgment, pro-judgment, and stereotypes, but empathic understanding. The third variable needed is authenticity, to be authentic and to be perceived by the others as authentic. And then in every relationship, there are some ruptures of this alliance based on trust. Well, then important is the ability from both parties is to repair the alliance, to say, excuse me, I didn't want to hurt you, or whatever. I have seen this with my own eyes for the last 50 years, with the clients in psychotherapy, with students at any level and grade, with head states and diplomats, and with community work. But what I have seen with my own eyes is just confirmed with a lot of research and results of such research that are congruent with just what I said. So if we want to restore trust, we have to promote the election of trustable politicians that are reliable and transparent. If we want to restore trust in the schooling system, we have to base relationship between teachers and students based on respect. And most of all, we have been destroying the environment. So we need to restore the capacity of not being at war with ourselves, with other people, and with living system, because we've been destroying our livelihood. But the future can be actually promising, because the research that I've been talking about is available to everybody, and there are so many examples of this. So, for example, one thing would be, and here I finish my intervention, to create, maybe the World Academy, a free database on where the restructuring of trust and the effective working alliance with the good cost-benefit effect is available for anybody interested in this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. And Glenda, we'd love to hear some opening remarks from you.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate, and happy anniversary to WAAS. Trust, not an easy thing. We tend to think about trust not as a problem to solve, but as a pattern to shift. That it's high dimension, it's open system, it's non-linear. And so the idea of fixing it with an individual specific fix at any level of the system seems unduly hopeful. So when we think about wanting to establish patterns of trust, we think of 3 practices that we use in human systems dynamics. They'll all be familiar to you. One is inquiry. So if you show up, or as an institution show up in a space in a true stance of inquiry and curiosity, that begins the pattern formation. The second is to be adaptive. So there's a process that we call adaptive action, where you see and then you understand and then you act, but always in consonance and in relationship to the system, whether it's individual or institutional, at whatever scale. And the third is to understand and to think about patterns. So that if I think about trust, I don't think about it as a finite game with a beginning and an end and winners and losers, but I think instead about it as a continuous process of engagement, where at each individual interaction, there's an opportunity to establish a pattern of trust in a moment, and then a sequence of those or a collection of those establishes a larger scale trust pattern over time. And so in our basis in complex adaptive systems, that's how we think about trust in human systems. And I feel so sorry that I haven't heard what others had to say before, but I'm pleased to be here, and I look forward to seeing you in the video. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And you're not so late. Don't worry. Denis, we've had the pleasure of being on a couple of discussions today, but I look forward to your remarks on this topic.
Thanks, John. And maybe first of all, to explain my background, I was a member of Parliament for 28 years. I was served as a cabinet minister in Ireland, and in the recent past, I've chaired a working group of parliamentarians within the Interparliamentary Union, which is like the United Nations, but where parliaments come together. And that working group has been focused on how we can feed scientific evidence into the whole policy process within Parliament. And in relation to this question of trust, I'm going to revert back to the paper that Gary and Catan produced and the talk yesterday in relation to the peace offensive. And one of the key elements in relation to the peace offensive is to try and promote positive momentum on peace and human security through innovative strategic initiatives. And I think what we urgently need to see is leadership in thought that actually translates into effective action, and picking up on what Glenda just said about developing a trust pattern. And I think what we need to do is to look at a number of lighthouse projects that can develop this trust pattern that Glenda has spoken about, can address the need as set out in the peace offensive for strategic initiatives. And one of those, I believe, is the Human Exposome project. And this is a project about mobilizing science and technology as a force for good, bringing researchers, policymakers, decision makers, and global stakeholders together to address environmental health disparities and promote environmental justice. And it's about integrating cutting-edge research to transform our healthcare system, ensuring that medical advancements align with environmental stewardship to safeguard future generations. And I think we have a chance now to actually try and stop people getting sick in the first place, rather than waiting until actually diseases show up, by tackling the root causes of illness, such as pollution, poor diet and stress, many of which are integrated into the whole Sustainable Development Goals. Globally, disability adjusted life years from diabetes to Alzheimer's disease have doubled in the 20 years up to 2021. Over that time, heart disease has trebled, and that's according to the World Health Organization. And yet our genes only account for about 3 to 5% of these illnesses. Environmental factors like air quality, chemical pollutants, our dietary risks, social stressors make up about 90% of the causality in relation to chronic illness. And this is on the rise right across the world, both in terms of death and in terms of disability. And I think we stand today at a pivotal point where science can actually offer us the tools to uncover some of the hidden drivers behind disease and transform global health. And this Human Exposome project that was launched in Washington earlier this year is that transformative opportunity, a lighthouse project to bring everyone across the globe together in a joint initiative. And it's a bit like the Human Genome Project, which transformed our understanding of our genes. And what researchers are trying to do now in a broad range of research disciplines, along with policymakers and decision makers like myself from right across the planet, low-income and middle-income countries as well, is to try and systematically map and characterize the environmental exposures that impact on human health right from conception through to death. It's a huge challenge. And on top of that, with all of the geopolitical tensions that we're dealing with across our planet, it makes it even more difficult. But it's an opportune time to bring everyone across the world together to make our planet a better place for everyone that lives on it. And the opportunities are huge here. Reduced hospital admissions, cleaner air, healthier diets, communities empowered to make informed choices. From a global perspective, we can address chronic illness, which has no respect for borders. And the knowledge in this project generates will help every single government tackle some of the shared challenges that we have, from respiratory illnesses right through to cancers that are linked with environmental exposures. And the economic benefits are huge. Globally, the cost of chronic illness is projected to reach $47 trillion by 2030. And we can help to alleviate some of the financial burden faced by many countries in actually addressing this issue. And of course, a healthier population means a more productive workforce, a stronger economy to help fund some of the social initiatives that many governments want to see developed. So I think supporting initiatives like this is a powerful message. It brings government together that are prepared to work at a time of global uncertainty to tackle a universal issue now that we have across our planet in terms of chronic diseases, and to show the public that governments are interested in their concerns, that they want to see the people that they represent having these issues addressed effectively. And I think it's a really innovative and practical bridge to bring about a real world impact to overcome the isolationist agenda that we see in some of our countries today. And I think this is not just, the Human Exposome Project is not just about research. I think it's the foundation of a new era of multilateral cooperation for a healthier and far more equitable world. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Denis. And I think that is really interesting, because clearly it benefits from the global scale of information that one can access for that, as well as the applications of it. So I think that's a terrific example of a lighthouse project. Thank you. Isabella, it'd be great to hear some thoughts from you.
Thank you, John. Fascinating conversation, and I'm so grateful to be part of this conversation with you. John, you had mentioned this sense of looking at, in the terms of the reflections you're talking about, related to trust. It's interesting that the 2025 Edelman Trust Barometer was on the subject of grievance, which I think for anyone who's an ethicist or a lawyer or a public policy maker, that is an incredible set of data and insights that can point the way in terms of coming up with some useful strategies, like even the one that Denis mentioned in terms of, are our governments, are our policymakers delivering on the kinds of questions and problems that the citizens are experiencing in the short term and in the long term. So it's a cross-cutting theme, but the very fact that the most serious crisis of trust by the top organization, the Edelman Research Institute, that looks into this, they pick that as the #1 thing we should be looking at. So I think that's quite fascinating. It's usually released at the World Economic Forum in January, so there'll be a new one coming out next January. But what's interesting, at the same time, the forum itself, from their internal research, issues a similar report, but on essentially global risks. And I find it fascinating to take what Edelman is saying about trust and look at it alongside that catalog of global risks, which is dramatic, and that list is getting worse. And it also seems more intransigent in terms of how do we intervene. And the comments made here about the necessity for collaboration and also impact measurement come through very clearly. So these insights on not a problem to solve, but a system to shift are also really fascinating. And the notion of the lighthouse to really galvanize attention. So I wanted to just make that point on the side of on the trust point. But I also wanted to say that I've been thinking a lot about trust because I'm going to be designing an interdisciplinary colloquium on the topic of trust at Oxford University next year. So most of my information is in the form of questions. So your own comments are so helpful in informing me about what should be considered in this kind of conversation. And the Edelman research is certainly part of that, sort of that notion of trust and the crisis of grievance. Risk is certainly part of that. The notion of why trust is so important, both personally and institutionally and socially. It's a multi-level approach that needs to be made. The challenges of trust and what can be done to address them, how communities can respond with some form of resistance, how do we respond to the larger global turbulence, using that exact word that we've been using for the last few days. Also, I'm one of these people that thinks in a very cross-sectoral, multidisciplinary way. So what about the sectors? What about public services? What about business and the economy? What about civil society and NGOs and how they operate now, including their push toward localization? It adds a whole nother level to collaboration and trust building. I also see this sense of shared objectives that might inform other sectors in terms of whether it's business, whether it's governments, whether it's civil society. Needless to say, the AI question is a major theme here. You're probably aware that one of the largest single benefaction in the entire university's history was by Schwartzman, and 500 million, I can't remember now, dollars or pounds, you can tell from my accent, 500 million to establish AI, humanities, and ethics at Oxford. It's transforming infrastructure within the middle of Oxford, which is not an easy thing to do. There's a new humanities quadrangle coming in, a humanities sector, and some of the best minds in the world are gravitating to start asking and answering the kinds of questions that we're asking on this very session. So it's an optimal time to be thinking about really transforming trust through interdisciplinary insights, whether it's science, law, medicine, philosophy, journalism, education, of course, technology, and the list goes on and on. And it's something that is not just for us as more senior academics and policymakers and business leaders, and certainly leadership itself ties into that, but also that next generation and what the students are concerned about. And they are deeply concerned about the issues in the conversation that we're having now. So I just wanted to say, I don't have a lot of information on trust in front of me. I have a lot of questions, and I'm so grateful for how you can help me think through and develop this notion of a consultation colloquium at Oxford. And let me also mention another word, which is fear. That is actually in the headline of our planned session, which is restoring trust in an age of uncertainty, insecurity, and fear. And when I think about fear, I also think about major anniversaries, as we are here today thinking about our 65th anniversary for WAAS. But in 1941, President Roosevelt in America gave a speech to Congress, which was later known as the Four Freedoms speech. So October, I think, no, January 6, 1941. And he developed a scheme for four freedoms: the freedom of religious worship, the freedom from fear, the freedom from want, and the freedom to live a life of dignity. Those four freedoms helped to inform the Transatlantic Charter. They later informed the United Nations Charter, and they later informed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a phenomenal pedigree. It also ideally dovetails with the campaign that the World Academy is involved with on global security. In a sense, the answer to the fear is the global security in all of those dimensions. And the kind of conversation we're having here could be shaped in that framework of how do we both enhance trust, get the data, understand the impact, work collaboratively, do it cross-sectorally, use the problem solving that Denis so eloquently described for any kind of problem, enhance government outcomes, citizen satisfaction, and freedom of religion, freedom from want, freedom from fear, and that life of dignity. Those freedoms could be help to be realized through that kind of strategic approach. I think it captures the imagination, and I think everyone understands fear, whether it's a school child, whether it's someone who's a teenager, whether it's a senior executive, whether it's a government leader, whether it's a military leader. We understand fear, and we know how important it is to mitigate it in any way possible. So I think we have a unique opportunity thinking about trust, thinking about technology, thinking about the brilliant minds that WAAS has drawn together, and how this could support this campaign for global security and human security. Thanks.
Thank you, Isabella. And you mentioned the Edelman report, which I've cited earlier, and actually Alberto cited it in his slides. On his slides, and I think it is a very instructive report, including on what you just mentioned about fear, because one of the underlying things that it's seeing is a greater trend towards fear of institutions not looking out for individuals, not having their interests at heart, and that they're really subservient to the interests of the wealthy and so on. I mean, things that are not unusual and new in the history of the world, but becoming more prevalent. And so there is clearly an element of fear in all of this. That's in the lack of trust that we see. Yeah, Ryan, please give us any opening remarks. Then we'll have a few questions for everybody.
So, just a quick overview on who I am. So, I'm a physician. I've spent most of my career overseas, helping people in times of disaster. So I spent a year on the ground in Haiti in 2010 after their big earthquake there. So I've seen the fear, I've seen the lack of trust, I've seen the chaos that ensues when all else has failed. And so I've spent a career trying to restore hope and trust. And I'm also helping on the board of an organization educating girls in Afghanistan against the will of the Taliban there. So I'll start with a quote. Never had men considered themselves so intellectual and so completely in possession of the truth. Never had they considered their decisions, their scientific conclusions, their moral convictions so infallible. All were excited and did not understand one another. Each thought that he alone had the truth and was wretched looking at all others. They did not know how to judge and could not agree what to consider evil and what good. They did not know whom to blame, whom to justify. Men killed each other in a sort of senseless spite. Sounds like our times. But that was written in the 1860s as part of the epilogue of Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. So we are being surrounded by misinformation, disinformation. We have many groups on all extremes trying to sow fear and confusion. And why do they sow fear and confusion? Because once you have the fear and confusion, we feel more empowered when we're angry. And then the anger can be directed so that you can have somebody to hate or something to hate, something to be afraid of, and draw the people together, and then you're under control. So as we're trying to look at solutions, we need to keep that in mind. If any organization or individual is telling you to be afraid or to be angry, they want to control you. So figure out what they're trying to make you do. Okay. We need to look towards organizations that will counter these things. We need to counter the fear, anger, and hate with hope, compassion, and education. That's what we need to do. We need to rehumanize the people that have been dehumanized. So working with the girls in Afghanistan, helping them see that they have a value beyond property, which is what they're being told they are by the Taliban, essentially. Their voices cannot be heard in public. They are not allowed to go outside. They can't go to the hospital without a male relative present. They need to see that they are of worth, and giving them an education that is recognized internationally helps them start that process. Helping the people of Haiti when they lost everything, literally. You know, I worked with people who lost their home, their family, and every earthly possession. And how do you get them to see any light at the end of the tunnel, any reason to go on? So you start small. Help people see the little hope that they have. You got out of bed in the morning. That shows hope, that you had an expectation that things would be good enough, that you could find food, shelter, safety. Okay, and I'm not talking about the passive hope where you sit on the couch and wait for a free pizza to be delivered. I'm talking about the active hope, which drives you to start an education, not knowing if the world will be there at the end of your education, but with the hope that that will open more possibilities for you, that you'll be able to do more, you'll be able to provide for yourself and a family. Having children shows great hope because you have the expectation that the world will be around and safe enough for them. And so there's so many people living in active danger, and helping them to find hope and trust. That's the challenge. But what we're living in right now is a world where people are referring to others as non-player characters. They are dehumanizing everyone other than themselves and calling compassion our greatest weakness. Compassion is never a weakness. We need to use tools like AI to connect more to humanity rather than distance ourselves further. We should not be having our intimate conversations with an AI chatbot. We should have that used as a tool to help us to connect to actual human beings. We're living in an isolated, angry, afraid society. And we have wonderful tools that can help us to change that. So use the tools for good purposes and open our hearts to compassion, even though it hurts, it's painful, it's difficult. And then help others find hope. Okay, that's all I have to start. So I'll let us move forward so I don't take up too much time.
No, well, Ryan, thank you very much for that, and for grounding us in the very real world implications of this conversation, and your as this lived experience. So it's quite poignant and affecting. So thank you for that, and brings to mind a question. Maybe we could go back around through the panel. You mentioned, Ryan, your words were start small. Denis earlier mentioned a lighthouse project around human genomes and disease, but maybe we could go back around to each of us. And one of the questions to me is, how do we motivate people on this issue? The things you mentioned, for example, Ryan, the values you articulated, and certainly all of us, and not least of which was Alberto. I think if we can a moment stipulate to and say that it seems this group would agree with most of those values, if not all. But how do we motivate people to do something and use the tools that exist around these types of issues? What does it take to get more people engaged in this? And we'll go back around if that's okay. So Alberto, any thoughts on that would be most welcome.
Yeah, one of the many ways is to share with everybody the incredible damage that the destruction of human rights and human security brings not only to the affected population, but to each of us. Every person going to the supermarket is paying part of the cost of the destruction of human rights and security all over the world. We have in Italy 1% of the GP every year burn for just trauma of young people. And only 1 in 3 trauma survivor is detected by the system. So basically, Italy loses 3 times as much. So if we put down transparently what everybody is lacking, and also the cost benefit, for example, the World Academy has, I launched a trauma care free training program for Ukrainian colleagues. And what is the magic word restoring, even helping people traumatized to grow from trauma? Reestablishing trust. And how reestablish trust? With the relationship based on respect, empathic understanding, and authenticity. These are not a good idea and of good people. These are scientific, solid research. But we need to help people to have a trust sextant, to orient them to have more trust on themselves, in others, and in the world. If we have trust in life, we would be less distrust towards ourselves, others, and all the life forms.
Thank you very much. Glenda, you mentioned kind of an approach to systems thinking, and I would call it humanistic systems thinking, if I may. And how do you motivate people to embrace that?
Thank you. There are a couple of things there. So one is, I just want to say how I'm smiling as each of you talks about your interventions. I'm hearing, whether you intend it or not, that there's humility of inquiry in each one, that there's iterative learning and action over time, and that you respect the connections. And so it just is it's been really fun for me to hear your powerful real life interventions in that way. There are 2 things that I'd like to kind of extend that have been touched on. So one has to do with this systems approach of complex systems, and that's the blessing of nonlinearity. That in these systems where agents are massively entangled and mutually causal, by acting trustworthy, you engender trust in others. And so that process, that kind of reflection, evolutionary emergent process in systems is going to be really a friend to us as we try to spread this work around. And this is the second thing, it's not a once and done kind of question. If any program is not continued over time, if there's not a continuity to it, because the system's not going to come along quickly, it's going to take many interventions for a trust pattern to emerge. And so if we're not totally committed to an intervention over time and in a consistent way, then we'll abandon the system before it has a chance to build trust. And so those 2 things, one is believing in the power of the system to regenerate what is positive and healthy. And the second, to stick with it in a kind of continuity, to encourage, give the system a chance to emerge into a new pattern. Those are the 2 things that I would just add to the wonderful ideas that I've heard. So thank you.
And thank you. And now, Denis, you did give us a very specific project as a lighthouse project, which is fascinating and important. How do you motivate people to rally around it?
I'll come back to the comment that Glenda made earlier, and that is that you build trust with an intervention over time, and you have to be committed to that intervention over a period of time. And I go back to my own experience and the presentation by a colleague earlier on in the week, Bertie Ahern, the former Prime Minister of Ireland, who was one of the architects of the Irish peace process. And it has been a very challenging ongoing peace process that we're involved in. And one of the things that has been absolutely consistent in terms of the engagement between the two governments on the island of Ireland, between the governments between our different islands, has been the use of evidence and science to try and move policy issues forward. And it was a way of having an intervention over time that wasn't moving, shifting, and changing with the changing global dynamics. It was based on evidence. It was based on a clear platform of trying to solve solutions, common challenges that we have, and come forward with common solutions based on research evidence, academic evidence, scientific inquiry. And that's why I think this particular project that I'm talking about in terms of the Exposome project is so innovative, because it's being driven by medicine, it's being driven by science and research, but it requires government intervention, the governments to come along that process in terms of developing the policy and the regulatory interventions that are required. And why I think this is really interesting is, and it comes back to a point that I made earlier, you know, we have to pick our battles in terms of building trust in a multilateral society, in such a fragmented multilateral planet that we're in at the moment. But can we pick win-win issues that there are clear self-interests there, but also there are huge multilateral benefits? And this is a project that does that. There isn't a country in the world now that isn't managing some challenge in terms of chronic illness. In my own country, and as Environment Minister in Ireland, one of the challenges that I had to deal with was the fact that 4 people a day were dying in my country because of poor air quality. And we huge problems with chronic illness in terms of asthma with children. 1 in 5 children in Ireland have asthma. 1 in 13 adults have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And you can go to any other health or environment minister across the planet, and they will identify other chronic illness challenges that they have. So there is a clear self-interest here, both north-south and east-west. And is there now an opportunity to bring a coalition of the willing together that is going to work on a multilateral basis, regardless of geography, regardless of religion or ethnicity, to look at these problems and come forward with practical solutions? And I think this is one that ticks those particular boxes. It's not going to be solved overnight. This is a marathon. There are hopefully going to be some small wins in the short term in relation to it, but it is about a long-term commitment of governments, of academia, of science and medicine, of policymakers and decision makers, everyone coming together, agreeing at the end objective that we want to see. Yes, it's a long journey, but working towards that. And I think it is something that meets that win-win situation of addressing the short-term self-interest of countries as well as dealing with the global challenges as identified by the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you for that. Isabella, you've focused on a number of questions, and also you remarked that you find students are very engaged in these questions. But in your view, has that engagement translated into actions and what they then adopt as values and actions? And if not to the degree we'd like, what do you think would motivate them more?
Well, a couple of points. First, I'm just very fascinated by the latest exchange of comments. And what struck me in terms of the trust question and also the government question in terms of delivering on services is that foundational notion of, whether we call it an enabling environment or an infrastructure, or looking at SDG 16 on peace, justice, strong institutions, places like the Institute for Economic and Peace do a positive peace index. The World Justice Project does a rule of law index. Freedom House, until it was basically gutted, was doing a Freedom in the World index. There's also a corruption perceptions index. And I think because these are data driven, they do get more headlines and more people read and respond and react to them. And because it is on a comparative basis and often year on year, it has that bit of a narrative that we've also been talking about throughout this conference. So SDG 16 is something that I care deeply about, and I see it as a foundational goal to achieve, to accelerate achievement on all the other goals. And the private sector also has a deep stake in this. I worked on a project with the United Nations Global Compact on this exact issue of how the corporate board, not just looking at corporate governance, but also in terms of global governance in SDG 16. Because you can't have a perfectly run business in a chaotic, conflict-afflicted, unequal, untrustworthy, fear-mongering society. So I think there is that larger interest in the economic sphere to create that stability. And I know ESG is on its way out, but it's also an ESG question. How can you have a fabulous ESG performance, environmental social governance, in a place that's in chaos, in a place that has violence, in a place where there's rampant distrust, healthcare issues, and so forth? So I think some of these underlying systemic questions is what appeals to me. Students, I think, have that sense of idealism, and they also are, I think, increasingly linking that idealism to potential career paths. When I first came to Oxford, it was a very uninterdisciplinary place. There was no business school, there was no Blavatnik school, there was no James Martin School of the 21st century. But within the business school, it was an interesting phenomenon, which is they used to have something called Silicon Valley Comes to Oxford, and some of the executives would come and sit in on classes and give the lectures and encourage the students in their careers. And that led to Jeff Skoll funding the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And it was an interesting study also within the dynamics of what a business school is for, because it shifted them obviously away from the bottom line in a very specific financial sense to a much more inclusive model about what business is responsible for. And students loved this. And the fact that they could engage with those social enterprises and use those lessons in their perhaps more mainstream enterprises was something that was extremely creative. As far as the management, if I can put it this way, of course, if you go into social enterprise, you're not going to exactly be pulling in the kind of salaries that if you went into asset management or if you joined one of the consulting firms. So there was a downward pressure on the rankings because entry-level salaries for the graduates is one of the criteria. But in the long run, that has really shifted the ethos of the business school to look at also the humanities, but also problem solving. And one of the projects that one of the former deans, Colin Meyer, developed with the British Academy was a 4-year project on the future of the corporation, which developed a concept of corporate purpose. And that corporate purpose being to solve the problems of people and planet. And while you're making profit, of course, you're a business, you do not contribute to the problems of people and planet. So that really resonated with me. I served on the corporate advisory board on that project, and I thought it was genius. And I think that intuitively, the students today understand that not only do companies have to have a purpose, I think they're examining their own purpose, and they certainly have a big streak for the sustainable.
Great, thank you very much. I'll give you mine, and I am mindful of the time. So Ryan, I'm going to get to you in a second. I'm going to flip the question for you to a different question. But my father passed away 3 weeks shy of his 100th birthday a little while ago, which he had a terrific life. And towards the end, he wasn't able to articulate that many things that well. But whenever he would see me, he would always ask me, "What big things did you do today?" And I always felt that I fell short of that question because I'm not sure that every day I did something notably big. And Ryan, you mentioned this, but I did over time realize I could do small things every day and to keep at it. And so even though he would continue to ask me that question, I would answer it with small things that I did that day. but tried to keep up. So I do think, and again, Ryan, you mentioned that, and I do think that's a big part of this too, is there are big things to be done, but there's things that we can all do every day. Now, Ryan, I'm going to flip it to the fear question. So we don't have time to go around to everybody, but you've worked on the ground in very difficult circumstances with very real world issues. What do you fear most that people that prevents people from understanding what is really needed here?
So I was on a call with the Club of Rome a month or two ago discussing ideas for peace. And when I mentioned that this idea that we're being manipulated by people who want us to be afraid and angry, and I mentioned, Haiti and Afghanistan, and one of the ladies on the call said, but they're actually in danger. And there's a difference, okay? Fear is a normal reaction. Anger is a normal reaction, but they should not be the foundation for what we do. Mm. So we should not have international policies based on fear and anger. We should realize those are reactions, not strategies. Mm. Okay? We're not living in a world where zero-sum games exist. We think that we are, but even the richest people, they got there with the help of others, and others got wealthy with them. Even the worst dictators, they got there with the help of others, okay? So I think the Nash equilibrium is a better model for things, but in the end, we need to work together to address the fear. So you look at things like Malcolm Gladwell's broken windows theory. People misapplied that by thinking, oh, if there's broken windows and it increases the general crime in the neighborhood, let's crack down on minor vandalism. No, the idea was you fix those windows and you help restore the trust and the peace and the hope in the community. If you drive through a neighborhood where everybody is throwing garbage out of their windows, that community has lost hope. They don't see a future for that community. So rather than focus on that and just make it go worse, we need to work together to clean up our neighborhood, clean up our own lives, help to reduce these things rather than just using the stick. We need more carrots. We need to support programs to help people see that there is a brighter future and they don't need to be so afraid. And in Haiti, they brought me a woman who had lost everything. Her family was killed while she was preparing dinner on the day of the earthquake. So January 12th, 2010. So she went from celebrating to absolute tragedy, lost all of her belongings, her home, and her family. And how can you help her? She wanted to die, and anybody else would in the same situation. But I told her to use that pain to help others. Mm. Use the fear and the uncertainty to develop compassion and help others to heal. So I connected her with other women and children who had lost everything. And, she found a purpose, as Viktor Frankl spoke about. If you have a purpose, you can get through anything. Hmm. So I've kept following up with her and hoping to God that something would get through, and it worked. After a few months, that woman was smiling. She was surrounded by people who knew her pain because she helped them heal from their own pain. Okay. Rather than focusing on our own problems, we need to help the people around us to not be afraid. We need to actively seek the people who have lost hope and help restore it. And we can get people to do that out of pure selfishness, because it will help them psychologically as they change the focus of their own lives away from the things that they have lost. So we have to do something. And yes, we have a major uphill battle, but it's one person at a time, one step at a time, one day at a time. Help the people around us, help the people we can find. And then we will sow those seeds of hope and make a difference.
Once
Oh my
again, I
gosh,
want to
everybody.
thank you for your very real, heartfelt, and very affecting and true to life remarks. So thank you. We are at time, so I'll just close with one last thing that a little note, good note, I believe, for this panel and also for the World Academy overall. If you look at the Edelman report, which we've referenced, buried in there, if you look at all the different types of occupations, government occupations, business, etc., the two most trusted, still today, the two most trusted are scientists and teachers. So hopefully we collectively at the World Academy can use that trust that we still have to the purposes that we've talked about here. So thank you everyone for this and this terrific and heartfelt discussion. Thank you.